Hey, Prince Magnum, what does a Sonic restaurant in Union, Missouri and your past have in common? I'm going to tell you about that right here today on the Prince Magnum channel. Hello again and welcome to the Prince Magnum channel. I'm your host, Prince Magnum. Welcome to In Your Face. Here on In Your Face, I am known for telling people exactly how I see it, and I don't usually pull too many punches. It's just the way it is. That's why it's in your face. So today we're going to keep up with that. If you've kept up with the channel, you know that I've went through some crazy stuff. From alcoholism to being abused as a child, I've went through some stuff. Well, today we're going to talk about some of the child abuse that I went through and how it was a Sonic restaurant in Union, Missouri that kind of saved me from going off the deep end. The year is 1995. Now, for pretty much as far back as I can remember, I went through some form of abuse or another. It was just a rough time to be a child for me. In 1991, my parents decided to split up, and around that time, divorce was still kind of an uncommon thing. So when it was starting to become a common thing, kids would be sitting there crying, going, "Oh, my parents are getting a divorce." I was the first one to go, "My parents are getting a divorce," because I knew how bad it was. So for me, this was a great big blessing. And at that time, my dad was actually going off the deep end. I found out later why he was going off the deep end and why I had to go through some abuse from Dad. I'm not totally excusing him of that, but I understand, just the way it is. I'm soon to be 38. I think in my adult years I can kind of, there's some leeway you have to give there. So from 1991 to 1995, it was my mother and her live-in boyfriend at that time. Now, all that being said, all right, my mother is a very sick woman, sick in a way that medication has not been able to reach yet. She has no drug problem that I'm aware of, and she has no problem with alcoholism. She's just, for a lack of a better word, she's just nuts. Okay? She kept a live-in boyfriend that was extremely abusive to all of us kids. He was very abusive towards her. That sort of thing. But at the same time, she was still angry with my dad, so pretty much all of that came bearing down on me from the time I was 11 to the time I was 16. Her reasoning was because I looked like my dad. And like I had a choice in it, it's just kind of how it was. If something went wrong in the household, there was two people that were to blame. It was either my dad or it was me. It was my fault. That's kind of how it was, growing up. If something didn't go right, maybe the dishes didn't get done, and it wasn't my turn, somehow it was still my fault, and I'd be at the sink, and if she didn't think I was doing it fast enough, she'd start beating and pummeling on me. I think at one point she even slammed my head in the sink, full of dishes. Thankfully there was nothing sharp in the way. that sort of thing. You know, so I was going through this stuff, and you know, some of you have even already heard some of these stories. I remember the age of 14. I'm sitting in, I was actually in my bedroom, and I had this dresser, and I was listening to an album by Kiss. If you've never heard it, Unmasked. I know there's a ton of Kiss fans out there who've heard this. Have heard that album. I'm standing in front of, this dresser, and I've got the stereo playing, and, I was going through all this horrible stuff, and I could just picture out in front of me is all these people that were there to listen to me sing. And at that time, I was even in the high school choir. And, because at that point, a daydream like that felt a whole lot better than what I was going through the moment, I would be in front of my mother or something like that. So I'm picturing all these people out there, and I'm singing the song, and I was 14, so I probably wasn't super great, but I wasn't horrible. I'd heard myself a little bit. Mom actually stops me in the middle of the song and says, "You suck. I should probably pull you out of choir." Hurt my feelings, and of course, we all know that I went out and I was like I was going to be the best singer ever, even if I never got discovered. I was going to be the best out there, and that sort of thing. So, so I went through a lot of stuff like that. By the time I was 15, we were pretty much broke because her live-in boyfriend, Clay, really didn't keep much in the way of a job. He would get a job, maybe keep it about a month at best, and then he would quit, finding some stupid excuse. By the way, over-the-road trucker, and there was some good about him. Most of it was all bad. And I was always glad when he was over the road, and that sort of thing. So I dealt with these, things like this, and, many times I had to save my brothers from Clay, from getting beatings, things like that. So I dealt with a lot of stuff like that. So by the time I was 15, we were living in very destitute living. Most of the time, I think at one point we moved into a house, and the bedroom that I was in was extremely cold because we had to remove all of the insulation because the insulation was asbestos. We had to actually, I was in there dealing with, thankfully, nothing ever, I've never developed mesothelioma, I think is how it's pronounced. No, I've just massacred that. Us in the medical field and our really long names. Thankfully, nothing ever came from that, but it was like in the middle of the winter, so it was like ice cold, so there was no insulation. So I lived in conditions like this, and all the while taking the abuse from my mom and her live-in boyfriend, always having to look over my shoulder and things like that. The day came when there was a new restaurant being built in Union, and the restaurant is still there, thankfully, and it was the Sonic Restaurant, and we kind of monkeyed with my birth certificate a little, just a smidge, and kind of moved the year, kind of added a little bit so that it looked like I was a year older than what I was, which I found out later that long after they hired me and I was turning 16, they kind of already knew. But basically, I applied for the job, I got it, and I went to, for a couple days, I trained in Sullivan, at the Sonic Restaurant in Sullivan, Missouri. Basically, the second day that the Sonic Restaurant in Union was open, I was the man running the grill, and that was back in 1995. Now, where this story is going is, while I was there, I was still dealing with a lot of abuse, a lot of crazy stuff. I pretty much spent my whole summer working there, and I was really glad because, I would have to deal with unruly brothers that my mom did nothing to really actually discipline. And back in the 1990s, for those of us who remember, every child that was rambunctious was diagnosed with attention deficit disorder. And that's why a lot of times when I hear it today attached to kids, it's like, no, just whip their ass. Just like, it's like automatically. Some of them really do need that medication, but some of them don't. We still throw that around pretty heavily. But anyhow, and my brothers were no exception to the rule. So I had to deal with that, and I wasn't allowed to do anything to stop them from destroying the place. But if they destroyed the place, it was my fault. So I had to deal with that, and then I would go to work and be there at 4 o'clock, and that was my only safe haven. And I would say, I started there in like May, and by the end of April, everyone kind of knew what was going on. It was kind of hard to hide it. Mom would show up, and I'd have to sign my paycheck over to her, and if I was lucky, for 2 weeks, and this was back when minimum wage was $4.25 an hour. I was pulling down at that time like $200-300 paychecks, because I was just putting in as much time as I could, just so I could, just so I didn't have to go home. And while I was doing all of this, I was signing over my paychecks, and if I was lucky, I got maybe $20 out of that, and that was mostly just for paying for my meals at work. And I always got the same thing. And my friends over at the Sonic restaurant in Farmington will recognize this. I always order a cheeseburger with jalapeno peppers and the barbecue sauce for the hickory burgers. That's where that came from. So for years I go to a Sonic restaurant, and that's what I eat. And back then we had the cheddar, what a lot of you know as cheddar poppers. We knew them as cheddar peppers, and that was my side, and I'd always get a root beer. Of course, we know today that the cheddar peppers are not around anymore. Crying shame. Sonic corporate, get on that. So that was always my crew meal, and that sort of thing. And I always just, if it hadn't been for a lot of the abuse I was going through and the things that I was dealing with, a lot of times I was considered for management, but I never got to get it. And I constantly, basically my day consisted of, my summer consisted of watching my brothers till my mom got home at 3 o'clock. She would basically start yelling at me for whatever reason she could find, from the time she walked in the door to when she would take me to work. I would get to work, and basically from there I was off the wall, and just goofy out there, just having a good time, because it was the only time I could have any fun, all the while being the best that they had, as far as making food and things like that. And then as soon as I would clock out, usually I closed. I would then go home, usually about midnight, 11 o'clock midnight, I would get home. And from there, Mom would scream and cuss at me for things that I wasn't even there for, till about 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning. Basically, I'd have to stand in the living room, take this abuse. She might even slap me, take a belt to me, whatever she felt like that day. And then I would go to bed, get up the next day, and do it all over again. And that was pretty much most of 1995. Now, if I wasn't watching my brothers through the summer, like if I was in school, or I was still in high school, if I was in school, basically that took the place of watching my brothers in the daytime. That was my life. So I dealt with a lot of that. And that sort of thing. That was the life I lived. that was pretty much, again, that was the year 1995 for me, 15 to 16 years old. That's what I lived. And, so the only safe haven I had is was going to work at a Sonic restaurant. And when I say I developed a, kind of a zany off the wall attitude, tons and tons and tons of stories that I have about that old place. I remember one day I went into work and just kind of off the wall, trying to make myself, basically just kind of playing up the persona that you never knew what to expect out of me. I walked up to the walk-in freezer door, pulled it open, and I was sitting there looking at it. I was getting ready to go in there and get a hamburger meat for the grill. And I just thought, there's people that are dumb enough to put their tongue to, some frozen metal object and get it stuck. Wouldn't it be funny if I acted like I did that, just kind of acted that out in front of somebody, and just for a reaction. And I got my store manager, Josh. I often wonder where he's at now. And I pulled him back to, the freezer, and I yanked open the door and said, "Hey, Josh, take a look, man, frost!" And I acted like I stuck my tongue to the door and got it froze there. And I mean, I'm flailing around and I'm really putting on a show. And finally, I pulled away laughing, and I look over at him, and he's like, "I was just going to leave you there." So it was stuff like that to kind of keep the, he knew what was going on, and he knew that was my only release. And I think one of the saddest moments I had there, where it was really kind of true for everybody, what I was experiencing was, there was an older woman that worked evenings, and I'm not 100% sure why she would have chose evenings. It might have been that we had so many people on the daytime. But really what it boiled down to at that moment was I was being goofy and off the wall, and she looked at me and she said, "Have you no serious bone in your body? Can't you see that some of us are trying to work? Are you really that stupid?" And because I knew I was going to go home and I was going to get called stupid and everything else, it kind of rubbed me wrong. Here I am, I'm 15 years old, and I looked at her, I said, "No, I'm not that stupid." And I more or less just came right out and said what was going on. And I said, when I come to work, and I know I had tears in my eyes, I said, when I come to work, this is the only place I feel safe anymore. You people are the only people that know I'm joking, that know that this is the only place I can get out. All of this, what you see right now is just me getting out. Having the only fun I know I'm going to have, because when I leave this building tonight and I go home, my mother's going to be right there, ready and waiting to scream at me and tell me how much of a pathetic piece of crap I am. I said, "So say what you will about me, but I'm not stupid." And she looks at me, and being a mother herself, she's like, "I never knew. I'm sorry." And she gives me a great big hug. And so when I would be kind of goofy and everything, she was she understood after that. She really understood, and it made it it brought it home that for a lot of my coworkers at that moment how bad it really was. That what they were actually seeing, it was kind of just me getting out what was really hurting. After all of that, after everything that was going on, it was, like I said, it was really real at that point, and people started understanding. Imagine, if you will, you're awkward not because that's just the way it is, because I've always been kind of an outgoing person, but but I was an outgoing awkward, if that makes any sense. So at that point, it was kind of like, I wanted everyone to like me. I wanted it, because I knew when I got home I wasn't going to be liked. So for me, what it really amounted to is I wanted people to pay attention to me in a positive light, and I did it the only way I knew how. So for everybody else, seeing this happen, I imagine it was probably difficult for a lot of people. So there was a lot of that going on, and like I said, I was signing over my paychecks. There was a couple of times I had to talk a manager out of going outside to yank my mom out of her car and beat her with an inch of her life, and things of that nature, because he knew he was just so angry. Oftentimes called him the raging bull of Sonic. And he was just a great guy. Because he really, he was a good guy deep down. He really was. Assistant manager. I think when it really brought it home for him was, he wanted, I guess for some reason he was just having a bad day, and I said something kind of goofy, and it rubbed him the wrong way, and he started kind of taking it out on me, and one of the, the store manager, Josh, said, man, that's not cool. He gets enough of that at home. And he's like, what gives? And Josh more or less laid it out for him, and said, this is the only safe place he's got. Don't take that away from him. And that, and I kind of, I know that because I kind of overheard some of it. That sort of thing. It's just one of those things, So after dealing with all of that, and everyone's fully aware, there was still gals that, as I was trying to get over my awkwardness, the gals there really started understanding, and they, amazingly enough, there was a few of them that were still interested in me, but nothing ever happened, as far as dating, or I didn't start dating until my senior year, just before my senior year of high school. This time I was a sophomore going into junior year. So there was that, and I would even get to go home and my mother would scream at me. And remember, this is the 1990s. Homosexuality was still a taboo back then. Okay, even though I'm not, I'm straight as an arrow. I would get to go home, and some of the things my mom would even say was that and excuse the, but this is how, this is how we talked back then. Basically, I would go home, she'd call me nothing but a fucking queer and things like that. So there was a lot of stuff like that. But when she noticed that other gals would start taking interest in me, then I was nothing but a womanizer, one of those piece of crap guys. I was nothing but a fucking pig, and things like that. So basically, it went the other way. So I dealt with a lot of that. So it was really difficult. I think the real defining moment was one day Mom was actually being nice to me, and I did not know it, but she was talking to my dad, saying, I think our oldest, is gay, and Dad's like, I don't think so. So, well, he doesn't talk about girls, and Dad more or less said, he's not going to talk to him with you, okay? You're his mom. He's not going to talk to him. It's just not going to happen. And have you ever considered how you talk to him? So thank you, Dad. A little bit of common sense right there. Well, Mom, we were driving home, and Mom was driving. I was just kind of sitting there listening, and she asked me about this one gal that I work. She asked me, "Is there any gals at work that you like?" And I said, "Well, yeah, there's one in particular. We're really good friends, and I could easily see us dating." I said, "She's not the super prettiest thing." I said, "But it doesn't really matter. I really like talking to her." She's like, "Well, really? What's her name?" And I said, "Her name's Audrey." And she's like, "Well, I described her, and she's like, she sounds really nice." And well, how old is she? It's 19, and at that time I was just 16, so Mom really blew up, and that really, it just went bad from there. So then to Mom I was screwing everything in sight, including the dang hole in the wall that my brothers put there, and somehow I got the blame for that. Another story for another time. So basically, that was my life, in 1995, and around October of 1995, Dad finally had put in the paperwork to basically filed for custody of me, to get me out of that place, to get me out of that hellhole. And I had to spend a few months in St. Anthony's Highland Adolescent Center. I say a couple months because basically I went off the deep end, was ready to turn homicidal. Enough was enough. I had my belly full, I guess, as Dad put it back then. I had my belly full, and just couldn't take it anymore. And even though all I had to do was wait out the court case, that I was gonna get out of there, I just could not wait any longer. I had to get out. And she even made, the day she got served the paperwork, and of course the next day I'm in the hospital, she made me go in and quit my job. And everyone's like, the place is going to go to pot after this. Oh my God, wait a minute, never mind all that. Where's he going to go when he's taking this abuse? And a lot of people really got scared for me. And of course I went into the hospital and that sort of thing. And when I left St. Anthony's, I left with a diagnosis. Back then it was called post-traumatic stress disorder. Today we know it as post-traumatic stress syndrome. We keep changing the name. And this is 1995. This was kind of unheard of. A 16-year-old walking out of a stress unit, more or less. With a diagnosis like this. At this time, the only people that you knew of was people returning home from war, most commonly Vietnam veterans. And if you've watched any of my channel before, I talk about how it was Vietnam veterans that later on, years later, that helped me learn to cope with my PTSD. So real quick, big shout out to all Vietnam veterans. Thank you very much for all that you continue to keep doing for our country long after you've come home to a very cold reception. Again, thank you all very much, and I want to say that directly to the camera, because if it hadn't been for them, I don't think I'd have been able to stay sober. Pretty much it's picking up the pieces after that, trying to live somewhat of a normal life. Even to today, I don't think I live a normal life per se. But every time you see something on this channel, whatever the video is, whatever it's about, I feel like I get a little piece of that back, something that my mother took away from me. So in a way, even if that video doesn't get that many views, I feel like I just get that little bit back that was taken away from me when, all those years ago. And here I am, 37 going on 38 as I'm making this video. August 7th I'll be 38. I really feel like I get a little something back. Well, I want to say right now, for anybody watching, especially my friends over at the Farmington Sonic, here we are now. Just last year, I started doing here on In Your Face, right here on my own channel. It's kind of a funny story. When I went over there, and I'm like, these guys are always doing good stuff for me when they come to McDonald's. I want to do something good for them, and then I called the corporate office, and I was kind of giving the cold shoulder there. Their people at corporate didn't do anything to really put put those people over at Farmington over, and I did that whole video. A lot of that was because if you will, at that moment, there's still a lot of love for the Sonic food chain, even though I work for McDonald's, and they have done so much for me, you know, and I would say the McDonald's Corporation, just overall, McDonald's in general, if you will, in the last 10 years has probably done more for me than most people would like to think about. I mean, technically, they're even making me famous right now. But there's still a soft spot in my heart for the people at Sonic, you know, the people that work there, because of the Sonic and Union, that being my first job and what it actually meant to me. Kept a roof over my brother's head, you know, stuff like that. You know, despite everything I was going through. So when the corporate people, you know, kind of brushed me off when it came to their people, that was really what started that whole thing. Kind of a side note, the day after that video hit YouTube, the people from Sonic were coming over to McDonald's, going through the drive-thru, I believe in hopes of being able to catch me, and were thanking me for the video. And really, I guess for all of you out there in the fast food industry, no, thank you all for continuing, because you never know that awkward teenager that's sitting there being goofy and off the wall. You really don't know what's going on right now, or that one that's really quiet and shy. You may not really know what's happening in their life at that given moment. They could be going through exactly what I went through. So that's really, I mean, that's just kind of a big footnote here on the Prince Magnum channel, why I go into the restaurants and put their employees over. It's because, you know, I guess you could say it's kind of for number one, we all look out for each other in the fast food industry, but the other is because if it hadn't been for a Sonic restaurant in Union, I wouldn't be here today. They were the ones that kind of kept me afloat during those really dark days back in 1995. Now, before we get to the end of the video, I want to leave you all with this little moment. I had to go up to Union not too terribly long ago. The time itself is a little off, but the date is accurate in the time code. But I think it's safe to say, you know, for years when I've been in Union, it's been hard to actually go to that old restaurant. But for the first time in a long time, well, I'll just let you all watch this. I want to thank the assistant manager who came out and brought me a good old Sonic Fireball, as I have so lovingly called it all these years. You know, I don't think a lot of you realize, you know, how important that moment really was, to visit the old Sonic and to kind of relive the good moments, because even though it was very dark, it was a very, you know, imagine going to work and that's your only safe haven in a world that's so dark and bleak. You know, that's your only safe haven, is going to work. And to kind of relive, I mean, you know, my wife was there, who was actually sitting off camera. I asked her to be here to kind of, you know, moral support for this video. She was there, and I was able to actually point to different spots where good things actually happened, and to be able to tell my wife about that, and to be able to tell her those stories and to kind of relive those good moments. I just want to thank all the people at the Union Sonic for being there that day, for the place being open. I want to thank the owners for keeping up with the old building and everything, and keeping the memories alive for me, because it was, I guess you could say, a great homecoming to the restaurant that still has a very fond place in my heart. Because again, and I need to emphasize this, if it hadn't been for the people that were there, just in general, for everybody being there, I wouldn't be here today. Because at that point in time, the only option that seemed possible was either play the Menendez brothers. For those of us who are old enough to remember the Menendez brothers, God, I'm showing my age, or take myself out of the picture altogether. And if it hadn't been for those people, I wouldn't be here today. And since this has been such a dark and bleak video, I want to tell you all, I want to leave a kind of a really funny story of a very fond moment working there. I'm 16 years old. It's my junior year of high school, and I'm sitting in my biology class, and we're talking about the periodic table of elements. And my instructor, who was absolutely hilarious, and I wish I could remember his name, he was talking about helium and what it does with oxygen, how it displaces oxygen. And he said, are there any of you in here that on a regular basis has taken helium balloons and inhaled the helium to change your voice to that high-pitched, squeaky voice? Well, one of my other co-workers was in the class with me, and we both raised our hand. And he said, "You two are idiots." And we're sitting there snickering because we work in the same place. He said, "How many of you in here have ever done that directly from the tank?" And this gal, her and I both raised our hands again. And he said, "You two are really idiots." He said, "You two must work in the same place." He said, "Because the pressure could have blown the back of your throats out and killed you both. What kind of morons are you?" And I couldn't help myself, and I raised my hand and said, "Really big ones." And of course the whole classroom busted up, and it was just really funny. You had to be there. But it was just, we talked about it afterwards, said, yeah, they figured that we would be the two because we worked together. So we had a big laugh about it, and it was really good. I forget the gal's name that I worked with that was in the fight, but it was a good time. It was a very funny moment. I was grateful for it today. I wouldn't want to relive my high school years at all, but it was definitely a good moment. And everyone's like, "You two work together." They knew right away. Even the instructor had to point it out. It was just great. So there you have it. That's how that whole series about talking about restaurants really, because initially I wasn't going to actually do any other restaurants except the one I worked in currently, but that's how it all got started, So you can all thank a corporate person and an abusive mother for helping me, for being my inspiration. All right. As usual, if you enjoyed this video, please, as always, leave a like. If you've got any positive feedback, it's always accepted. Just go ahead and leave it in the comment section below. If you don't feel comfortable with that, you're more than welcome to shoot me an email. I mean, just get out your keyboards or however you kids do that stuff nowadays, and shoot me an email at princemagam1@gmail.com. I will do my very best to get back to you as quickly as I can. Unfortunately, I get about 6,000 emails a day. That's kind of overemphasized. It's probably closer to like 30 from various friends and from members of Alcoholics Anonymous. And it's just sometimes really hard to keep up with it all. Sometimes I just got to take it in piecemeal, and then it all gets backed up. You should see my email box. If you're not subscribed to the Prince Magnum channel, now would be a great time to do it. Project Spirit's nearly back, so there'll be a big comeback video coming up. I've got a steak episode I still need to edit for Surviving Romance. Tons and tons and tons of stuff I'm still working on. I've got too many irons in the fire, but it's a great time to subscribe right now. And if you're really savvy, like some of you younger ones are today, you'll hit that bell icon and you'll be notified every time we upload a brand new video. As always, get out there and work on a project. I don't care what it is, just do something with yourself. Idle hands and a creative mind make horrible bedfellows. If you have a sweetheart, sweep them off their feet. Do something special for them today. Don't take them for granted. And as always, if nobody out there, no matter where you're at in your life, if nobody out there if they've not told you that they love you today, Prince Magnum does. God bless you, and have a happy 24. Thank you.
Are you about to call me an asshole?